guys, welcome back to another YouTube video. If you are new here, my name is Lexie. Thank you for joining. I will put my Instagram down below. But in today's video, I'm excited to break down in my opinion, the top 5 biggest posing mistakes I see bikini competitors make. And I have visuals, I have side-by-sides to break it down. So I'm super excited to dive into this topic because I feel very strongly about posing. For those of you that don't know, I am a competitor, but I also am a coach. I coach a lot of different, I coach a lot of bikini athletes, and specifically a lot of newer bikini athletes. So I teach a lot of girls posing from the ground up. And you know, I try so hard to preface this to all of my competitors, and just I try to preface this on my Instagram a lot as well. But posing is so important when it comes to the division of bikini. I mean, it's important for any division in bodybuilding, but specifically bikini. You know, part of what is judged on stage is your stage presence, right? And that is your posing. And the way I like to look at it is, you know, your physique could be the most amazing physique, but if you don't know how to pose it or present it properly on stage, it doesn't even matter, right? And you work so hard and you work so diligently for your physique. Why mess it up with something as simple as posing that, you know, is in your control, right? So without further ado, we're gonna break down, in my opinion, the 5 biggest mistakes I see bikini competitors making, and then I'm gonna put graphics up ahead or up above as I'm going through these, so that way you guys can kind of see the visual representation as I talk through it all. All right, so the first mistake I see being made is going to be hiding that back shoulder in the front pose. So you guys can see above the visual I am putting up, you can see how on one side I'm hiding my back shoulder. So the hand that's on my hip, I'm hiding my back shoulder. And you know, I think the biggest thing that is important to remember when it comes to bikini posing is when you are posing for the division of bikini, it's all about balance, right? The way I like to frame it is when you look at somebody's front pose and back pose, everything should kind of just be like good, right? There shouldn't just be one thing that's absolutely great and the rest is just kind of bleh, right? And so what I mean by that is you don't necessarily want one thing popping out more than another. You don't want one muscle to be overly dominant when you are hitting your mandatory front and back poses, right? That is not bikini. Bikini is all about shape, it's all about balance, and it's all about kind of fitting that hourglass shape, right? So you can see up above when I am hiding my back shoulder, it really does take away from my balance, right? It takes away from that hourglass shape. And this is a very common mistake I see a lot of people making in their front pose is with their shoulders, that back shoulder, sometimes that hand on their hip, that shoulder disappears, and it definitely throws off that entire balance of the front pose. And furthermore, it hides that hourglass shape and makes the physique look less shapely. So I would say that is mistake number 1. I see this all the time, you know, and hey, I get it as a competitor myself. I know it's really hard when you are learning your posing. It's really hard to understand where the angle of your core and your shoulders should be because it's very specific. And this is where, you know, it's really helpful to work with a posing coach, or, you know, if your coach poses you as well. It's just very important to work with somebody, you know, and just have a second eye. But disappearing or having a disappearing shoulder throws off your balance, throws off that hourglass shape, and it is number 1 for most common mistakes I see being made in bikini posing. All right, so number 2 when it comes to mistakes, and this is another one that I see happening in the front pose quite frequently. In fact, I would say this is probably the biggest mistake I see girls making, especially in their front pose. I see this multiple times every show I go to, and that is going to be essentially, and you'll see it in the graphic above, you'll see how on one side it looks like my waist is drawn out, and I see girls commonly doing this when they try to press into their glute in their front pose too much. So what happens is some girls think, oh, I want to try to make my glute look super, you know, I want to try to get my glute to pop in my front pose. And again, going back to what I just said, you definitely want your glute to be balanced with your frame. So, you know, if your glute is not balanced with your frame, you may need to pop it out a little bit more than other people, but you also don't want to pop it out too much to the point where it looks too dominant, right? But you have to be careful when you are pressing into your hip or trying to pop your glute out in your front pose. You have to be very careful and cognizant of your waistline at the same time. As you can see in the graphic above, when you pop into that hip too much, and if you don't control your core, then it can kind of press your waistline out and make your waistline appear bigger than it is, right? And so again, this is a common mistake. I would say probably the most common mistake I see bikini competitors make, and I see this one all the time in the front pose. So the way I always like to explain it is, even if you are popping into your hip a little bit, always think about keeping your chest nice and tall. Think about almost pointing your chest up towards the sky, and that'll allow you and make it a little bit easier to ensure that you are not letting your waistline come too far forward if you're popping into your hip. So that is going to be mistake number 2. All right, moving right along to mistake number 3. Again, this is a fairly common one I see a lot of girls making, and that's going to be in reference to the back pose. So you guys will see the visual above, and you'll see a really good breakdown of what not to do and what to do in the back pose. And I would say the back pose is furthermore one of the trickier things to grasp in a bikini posing routine, right? Because in your back pose, you know, contrary to what some people may believe when they first get into the sport, it's not just a matter of standing straight up and down and facing the back wall, right? In order to achieve that conditioned look with your glutes, in order to get that glute hamstring tie into pop, you are going to need to almost have a bit of an anterior pelvic tilt and arch your low back. But at the same time, you need to arch your low back and not let your upper body fall forward. So you'll see on the very right, you'll see what happens if you arch your back, but you also lean your upper body forward. Something that I always like to cue my clients with is I always like to tell them that you should arch your back in your you should arch your low back in your back pose, but you should always make sure that your shoulders are right above your hips and in alignment with your hips, right? So you can see it's not easy to do this, especially if you're a new poser. You probably don't have a lot of back mobility yet, but this is definitely something that improves with time. So if you just started posing and you're struggling to master the low back arch in your back pose, don't fret. It gets a lot easier over time with, the more you practice. But I also highly recommend you can get a yoga wheel. I will link a yoga wheel below. You can buy a yoga wheel, lay against the yoga wheel, and that'll help with your low back flexibility. You can also do certain stretches in yoga poses, such as the seal stretch. That's one of my favorites to do, just to loosen up that low back. And let this be a lesson too if you are a newer competitor or even just a seasoned competitor watching this. It's very important to stay on top of stretching, mobility, getting deep tissue work, going to a chiropractor if that's your thing, because if you are too tight with posing, it can definitely make it harder to hit these poses in the way that you need to be hitting them. So that is going to be mistake number 3. All right, moving right along to mistake number 4, and this is another common mistake I see being made in the bikini back pose, and that is going to be pinching the shoulder blades. So when you are hitting your back pose, if you are almost pinching your shoulder blades together, as you can see in this graphic above, what it ends up doing is it ends up making your upper back look smaller than it is, right? And I know a lot of people will argue, well, bikini, especially at NPC, is not judged on your back, right? But you also need to, no bikini isn't directly judged on the lats in the back. However, if you don't have, balanced lats, if you don't have a back, it's going to severely throw off the balance of your frame, right? And so having a wide upper back, having lats, in your back pose is really important because, again, it's going to help with that hourglass shape I discussed at the beginning of this video. You always want to think in terms of how can I accentuate my balance? How can I accentuate my hourglass shape, right? And by hitting your back pose and pinching your shoulder blades together, it's only going to make your upper body look smaller than it actually is, and that's going to throw off your balance. Now, I know that specifically at NPC Bikini, you don't bring your hair off of your back. Your hair covers your back the entire time. However, even with your hair covering your back, you're still able to see those lats, and the judges can tell if you're pinching your shoulder blades, it's going to make it look like you have no upper body, and it's just going to make you look very, probably lower body dominant, right? So again, you always want to pose to showcase balance and that hourglass shape. So you want to make sure that when you are hitting that back pose, you're not holding a ton of tension in your shoulders, and furthermore, that you're not squeezing those shoulder blades together, just making your upper back look smaller than it actually is. So that is going to be mistake number 4, and we are going to move right along to the last but not least, mistake number 5. So moving right along to mistake number 5, and you guys, this is probably one of my favorites to talk about because I think it is so cool to see what a big difference this simple cue makes in your back pose. So per the graphic above, you can see that on the left, it literally looks like I have no shoulder caps in my back pose, right? On the right, which is literally 2 seconds later, boom, I have shoulder caps. What in the world did I do? So this is one of my favorite things to teach people, and you do have to be careful with this because going back to mistake number 4, where I said you don't want to pinch your shoulder blades together, you have to be careful that while you're doing this tip I'm about to give you guys, that you're not also over correcting and pinching your shoulder blades together. But you can tell, again, on the left of this graphic, I have no shoulder caps. You can't see my shoulder caps, right? And on the right, oh my gosh, they're there. What did I do? So this is just gonna be a simple cue of remembering that when you're hitting your back pose, try not to protract your shoulder blades forward. You don't wanna roll your shoulder blades forward, because when you do that, it gets rid of that capped delt from the back pose, right? And bikini is all about full round bubbly muscle, but specifically in the shoulders, specifically in the glutes, right? And so, you know, the judges want to be able to see that shoulder, you know, especially even in the back pose, right? And so in order to not make your shoulder cap disappear, you want to make sure that you're not rolling your shoulder blades forward. You want to make sure that you're kind of rolling them back, retracting your shoulder blades without pinching those shoulder blades together, right? I know it's a lot, but this is one of those cool cues that it really can make a big difference. And you guys, I know that some of these details may seem very, very tedious, and you may think, oh, well, that's not going to make a big difference. But I'm telling you, the more competitive your show is, the bigger your show is, the more competition there is. I mean, especially if you're somebody who is looking to go to a national show and turn pro, these type of little details could literally take you from first place to third place, right? When the competition is that steep, little details like this, they certainly matter, right? So the higher up you get, the more competition there is, the more these little details, you know, just start to matter. So it's like, why not practice them early on in the game? But that concludes my top mistakes I see in bikini posing with the graphics. So those are 5 common mistakes I, as a coach, as a competitor, see very often when it comes to not only new competitors and new posers, but also I see this happening with, you know, seasoned competitors from time to time as well. So I hope that these were helpful, and I also hope that the images above were really helpful just to kind of see as a reference point. And if you are watching this video and maybe you're not a competitor yet, but you do have some interest in potentially competing one day, the other question I always get from girls is, Lexie, when should I start practicing my posing? And I always say there is literally no such thing as practicing your posing too early. I typically say the moment you think you want to compete, get a pair of posing heels. I highly recommend the Olympian 2.0s from the Shoe Fairy. They are so comfortable. I'll link them below. I do have a discount code for those, but I typically recommend the moment you know that you may want to compete, get a pair of posing heels. First and foremost, get those heels, put them on, wear them around the house, break them in, get comfortable in them. And then I always recommend consulting or seeking out a posing coach, or, you know, maybe your own coach. I know in particular, I coach my athletes and I also pose them as well. If your coach poses you as well, I typically recommend, you know, get with a posing coach, get with a good eye that can help you and teach you posing the right way, because, you know, I want you guys to learn from my mistakes. And when I first started competing years ago, I did not hire a posing coach at the beginning, and I just tried to kind of learn from what I saw online. And, you know, it gives you a very basic routine, but you slowly start to realize that posing is very specific depending on your frame, right? Again, posing is all about finding what's going to look best on you and what's going to showcase your balance and what's going to maybe hide your weaknesses, bring up the spots that need to be brought up. It's all about finding what's going to be best for your balance, right? So I cannot express enough posing early. There is no such thing as posing too early. The moment you know you want to compete, start practicing, and just hiring a posing coach. And, you know, maybe you're not working with them year round or, you know, for forever, but at least getting a couple sessions, I think, with a posing coach, it can be very valuable, just because sometimes the way we see ourselves is going to be very different than, you know, the way somebody else sees us. So it's always helpful to have that second eye. So anyways, I hope that this video was helpful for you guys. This was a requested topic, so I wanted to finally sit down and make this. If you did enjoy this video, do me a favor, give this video a thumbs up. Please share it. I really just love sharing free information with as many people as possible. So if you are a competitor and you know other people that may benefit from just watching this, please share this video. I would really appreciate it. Comment below if there are certain topics that you guys want me to speak on in future videos. And as always, I appreciate your support. I appreciate you watching my video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.